thing we have to fear is
in war.
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live. Thanks for joining us today. David, we've got a lot of news, obviously, in the Middle East, a lot of problems over in the Middle East right now. And, of course, no one could have possibly seen any of this coming. In Iraq and with Israel, I mean, there's no way anyone could have noticed that this was going to happen.
Wait a minute. I've been watching some pretty cool programs on TV, and I don't think I remember anything about problems in the Middle East. What are you talking about?
Yeah, there's just kind of it's just all wonderful, flowery. You know, everyone loves everybody, and
I remember hearing something about Iran, and there was something about Libya, and then there was Egypt. I think I heard something about Afghanistan and Iraq. Then seems like there was something going with Israel and Gaza. Is that Middle East? Would that be part of the problems you're talking about?
I guarantee you, if you've ever had a conversation with Congressman Louie Gohmert, you would not be shocked about what's happening over there, because that's one guy that's paying attention.
Yeah, it really is. It is amazing how many irons in the fire right now in the Middle East. And I say that facetiously because the administration talks like things are so much better over there than it's been in years. And I was being facetious with that, but yeah, there's a lot going on in the Middle East, and it's not good. I mean, there's more instability there than there has been at any point in the past 15 years or so. So there's a lot going. I would say this administration has not handled it right, but Louie Gohmert is a congressman who has really kind of predicted the outcomes based on what this administration is doing. And so instead of taking a firm stand and really kind of drawing a line in the sand saying, look, we're not going to tolerate this, we keep encouraging it by ignoring it, by turning our back on it, by actually facilitating the turmoils. So we're at a point now where you look at Iraq, all that we invest in Iraq, we just now about totally lost Iraq. So all the stuff we did there, terrorism is probably stronger there now than it was when we started this thing back in 2011. Although I will tell you, when we pulled out of Iraq some 4 or 5 years ago, terrorism was just really on the ropes. So they were in a serious situation. It looked like it was very good for America. But what's happened in the past 5 years under this president, terrorism has really rebuilt itself. It is now stronger and more lethal than it was in Iraq at any point in probably our lifetime. And we have the same situation going in other nations as well. So this has been an administration that has not done a good job of trying to take terrorists down or take terrorism out. We now see, I mean, we've not had a caliphate in our lifetime, but now we're seeing a genuine caliphate trying to start. And by the way, caliphate is that's what the Muslims see as a worldwide ruler. They intend to establish a Muslim world, not a Muslim nation, a Muslim world. And so the caliphate would be kind of like, if I can say it this way without offending anyone, a Muslim type of a pope. It would be their religious leader that rules the world, although that's not a fair comparison now because the pope does not rule, the world does not want to. He heads the church in the world, but it would be like the Pope had been back 1,000 years ago when it was more of a world ruler.
So if we've got all these problems over in the Middle East and we're supposed to be a world leader, we ought to be paying attention to that and stepping in the right places. We need leaders that see that coming. One of those guys is, as I mentioned earlier, Louie Gohmert. I mean, this is a congressman that's gone over there many times, has met with many of these leaders. Yeah. And saw a lot of this coming. Like you said, I mean, he predicted so many of these things.
That's right.
And so now that we're there, let's get some input from him. He's with us now, just calling in. Congressman Gohmert, thank you so much for joining us today here on WallBuilders Live.
Thank you. Always good to talk to you, Rick.
Hey, man, I know this is this issue in the Middle East and Israel under attack in Iraq, the whole situation. You've been one of the few guys in Washington to have a finger on this and really have seen this stuff coming for years and been sounding the alarm. What now? I mean, how do you try to get the president to finally wake up to the threat that he ignored for so long? What are you guys in Congress attempting to do at this point?
Well, I mean, we've been trying to get his attention. We've in addition to constantly passing bills to provide aid to Israel. And people need to understand, they see that we give Israel $3 billion and give Israel's enemies $3 billion. And I scratch my head over there, Rick. But people also need to understand the money we give to Israel, actually, they give back to us for weapons. And I tell you, Rick, everybody that's against Israel considers Israel basically, whether a little Satan, the smaller problem, and the United States, the bigger problem. So what we're doing when we're helping Israel with their defense, even if you take the religious beliefs you and I have completely out of it, the help for Israel is help for ourselves. We could not possibly afford to provide a defense for ourselves in a forward nature the way Israel does. But they're out there. If they're attacked, we're going to be next. So
yeah.
Any way we can help them is a good thing. And I think most people in Congress understand that. Unfortunately, the enemies of Israel see constantly that, this administration keeps snubbing them, and that's got to stop. Now, back in May of 2010, the administration, the U.S. administration of Obama, voted with Israel's enemies to force them to disclose all their weapons. Well, that took me back thinking about Hezekiah. When Isaiah was sent to him, he knew what he'd done, and he said, "What'd you do?" He said, "Well, these wonderful Babylonians." This is a Texas interpretation here. But, these wonderful Babylonians came over, and I showed them all our treasure. And it's not in the King James, but from the strict interpretation of the original Hebrew. And I showed them all the defenses in our armory. You never show others your defenses. I don't care who it is. And for us to demand that of Israel was a break in our tradition of supporting Israel. And within 2 days, you had the flotilla launch from Turkey going down to challenge the Gaza blockade. It was a legitimate blockade to keep rockets and missiles and weapons out of Gaza. And anyway, it just goes to, it's a fact. Anytime an enemy's nation see their strongest ally pulling away, it's provocative, and we have got to stop being provocative.
And not only do we hurt our friend Israel in those kind of ways, but you mentioned it earlier. I mean, we give just as much money to their opposition. Is that because there are people in Congress and the president that actually see a moral equivalence here between the two sides instead of realizing there's really a difference?
Well, that's what bothers me. How else would you give the same amount? I've had some people in Israel say, I know you'd be a staunch supporter of Israel, but you voted against giving Israel $3 billion. And I said, no, I voted against giving Israel's enemies $3 billion. I'd vote to give Israel $4 billion or $5 billion for defense, because I know it's a frontline defense for the United States. But it is insane to have what you just classified accurately, a moral equivalence between Israel and its enemies. And that push, though, has always come from the administration. Prior administrations have likewise pushed, but it's just nuts to be furnishing Israel's enemies money and weapons. I read just recently that Qatar had entered into an $11 billion arms deal with this administration. Well, most people would acknowledge Qatar as one of the biggest, if not the biggest, source of funding for terrorism. There are people there that try to play both sides against the middle. So that's a dangerous game that some people are playing, and we really have to stop.
No doubt about it. Got to take a quick break. When we come back, Congressman, I want to ask you what you see as the latest in Iraq and what America needs to do. How far should we go in stepping in to help these religious minorities that are essentially being wiped out? Back in a moment. Our guest today is Congressman Louie Gohmert. You're listening to WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In the case Lee versus Wiseman, the Supreme Court ruled that for an adult to mention the word God at a public graduation constituted both psychological and religious coercion against the students. Yet consider the actions of William Samuel Johnson, a signer of the Constitution and one of America's leading educators who served as the first president of Columbia College. At his graduation exercises, William Samuel Johnson declared to the students, "You this day have received a public education, the purpose whereof hath been to qualify you better to serve your Creator and your country. Your first great duties, you are sensible, are those you owe to heaven, to your Creator and Redeemer." Founding Father William Samuel Johnson believed that a public graduation was an appropriate setting to remind students of the duties which they owed God.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Congressman Louie Gohmert is our guest today. We're talking about the situation in the Middle East, both with Israel and then also in Iraq. Congressman, you've talked about this long before it even happened, but now we're in a situation where you have these religious minorities literally being wiped out. How far do you think America should go at this point in stepping in to help? What are you recommending?
Well, I think we don't have to go in with massive forces. We saw what happened when we became occupiers in Afghanistan, occupiers in Iraq. But, Rick, I think there was a beautiful example of the best way to handle, these kind of terrorists in Afghanistan in October, beginning October of 2001, a month or so after 9/11, after we figured out that these were radical Islamists in Afghanistan. We had less than 500, probably around 300 special ops, some intelligence that were embedded with the Northern Alliance. The local folks, they're moderate Muslims. They didn't want radical Islam in the Taliban running their country. They recognize how dangerous these people are. So we assisted them with so few boots on the ground, just special ops guys. We gave them some weapons, and we gave them aerial cover. We had bombers flying very high, and ever so often, one of our guys would literally pick up his contact, his radio with the satellite phone with the jet, would ask him to drop a bomb. He'd direct it in where it needed to go, and they'd wipe out another big group of Taliban. And so within about 4 months, the Taliban was totally routed. They were defeated. And it wasn't until we became occupiers in Afghanistan that they began to rebuild and people started having animus toward the United States. Whereas before that, they were exceedingly grateful for us giving them their freedom. So I think that's a great example. We could do it in Nigeria with Boko Haram, the same kind of evil viciousness there of radical Islam. We could do it in Iraq. We could do it, in Syria. If we had gotten in earlier, we probably could have done that in Syria. Now you've got the rebels that are worse to Christians and Jews than the current forces in power. So we got to be careful, but we could certainly use that same mode of operation in Iraq and Nigeria.
Is when I watch the news right now and I see what they're doing, am I just, I haven't heard anybody saying this, I'm sure they have, but am I seeing our tanks and our money being used by, is that what's happening now? They basically taken the things that we invested into Iraq and now they're using it for a lot of is that our stuff?
Well, a lot of it is our stuff, and that was one of the problems with President Obama screwing up so royally what had been teed up for him to just sign on to almost. It was a status of forces agreement with Iraq. We had the facilities, we had equipment there, and, President George W. Bush, he had actually basically had a status of forces agreement very close to being ready to go. So, it didn't make sense, except that he was going to give a possible victory to President Obama, let him have a big international feather in his cap by signing the Status of Forces Agreement. So what happens? Obama comes in and blows it all up, gets cute with it, and there ended up being no Status of Forces Agreement. So we ended up having to get out too quick and left a lot of equipment there. And, you know, it's very clear to me, having met with Maliki, Dana Rohrabacher, a congressman from California, brother Christian, dear friend. We've been in some rough situations, but he and I were questioning Maliki about his broken promises to us, and it made him so mad he disallowed us coming back to the country. But we can go back now because Maliki is gone. But all we were doing, and we could see this is not a good man. This is not a guy that's going to be able to stand up to Iran and to the bad guys, and he made things worse. And it was easy for Dana and I to see. We tried to warn people this is not a good guy. He's going to create more problems. But, you know, the administration just terrible advice from the people that advised him, whether it's Valerie Jarrett with her Middle Eastern influence in the background, or whether it's the 6 individuals that a Muslim brother periodical in Egypt in December 2012 claimed were Muslim brothers. We know that basically they have to be Muslim brothers. If you're the president of ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, or CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations, then obviously the Fifth Circuit affirmed the holding in the Dallas Holy Land Foundation trial that CARE and ISNA are front organizations for the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's kind of tough when this administration has Muslim brothers advising them on matters of Middle Eastern influence, and yet they're the ones that have a real whole lot at stake in this game. So, you know, you look at his advisors, then a lot begins to make sense.
Yeah, that so it's not just then. I mean, I guess I've written it off too often to just being in way over his head and just being such a neophyte on this stuff and making juvenile mistakes. It's advisors that actually really are coming from the opposition and have I hate to say it this way, but infiltrated our nation at the highest levels.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's he's listening to the wrong people. And you know, Rick, you brought up earlier the moral equivalence problem. When you have John Kerry as Secretary of State actually bring a moral equivalence between the democratically elected officials in the state, the country of Israel, with a terrorist organization, Hamas, putting them on equal footing, you have an incompetent Secretary of State who really needs to go do something else. Maybe he can go write a book about Genghis Khan, or maybe a novel about all the things that he said happened in Vietnam that he actually did not see happen. So, but he's doing enough damage right now. When I mentioned to him that some of our moderate Muslim allies in the Middle East are wondering which one of them we're going to throw away next, he said, "Who's saying that?" I'm going, "If I tell you, you'll throw them away. That's what they're afraid of." But, you know, I've talked to allies in the Middle East, moderate Muslims, and they do ask that question. You know, they say, "We've seen you have written agreements with Mubarak in Egypt, who was helping you go against radical Islam, and you threw him away. We saw you after 2003 enter really important agreements with Gaddafi in fighting terrorism. He was not a good guy, but after 2003's invasion of Iraq, he really became our friend. And when it came to fighting terrorism, And yet, and people, many of the leaders in Israel will acknowledge, Gaddafi was really helping us get the terrorists. So you throw him away, and if it weren't for us bombing his caravan trying to get out of the country, if it wasn't for this administration refusing to give an answer to Gaddafi's request to leave the country peacefully, leaving him hanging when he's trying to reach an agreement, then there would have been thousands of people who didn't have to die in Libya, and who knows what would have happened in Benghazi if we had listened and brought about peace without pushing to get Gaddafi killed.
And it's I don't know how you keep your sanity, Congressman. You're right in the thick of things there. We're so thankful you're there. We appreciate you coming and keeping us informed on it as well, and hope that you'll continue to be a voice for reason, and hope we can hang on till this guy's out of the White House and we can get somebody in there that knows what they're doing.
Well, I sure hope so. Thank you so much, Rick. And as far as keeping my sanity, if you read the left-wing bloggers, then you don't think I have any. So that's not a real issue.
Yeah, but we in Texas know better. God bless you, brother. Appreciate you coming on.
God bless you, too. Thanks so much, Rick.
And we're back now with David Barton. David, man, I wish Louie was the one calling the shots for the country instead of President Obama, who seems to be out to lunch on most of this.
See, here's the deal. And just to be real blunt, Louie has his finger on this, and he predicted what was going to happen because he understands the nature of the enemy we're fighting. The problem that Obama has is he does not understand the nature of the enemy, or he does not want to understand it. And Louie talked about the advisors he's got around him. And I've mentioned before, the one thing that has come out of all the Middle East turmoil is the Muslim Brotherhood is stronger in every place. Now, it has been interesting that while the United States has stepped in to help the Muslim Brotherhood, and we saw that in Libya, we saw that in Syria, we saw that in Egypt, etc., you have had those moderate Muslims rise up and say, we don't want the Brotherhood. And so we saw the change that we saw in Egypt, etc. So it's easier for Louie to know what's going to happen because he does understand the nature of the enemy. But when the White House has taken the position that the enemy is our friend, and you let the Muslim Brotherhood be your counselor, it's no wonder the Muslim Brotherhood is coming out in stronger positions, and you're thinking the Muslim Brotherhood is not a bad deal. And that's the instability that we've created, is we've been putting the bad deal in charge of so much of this, and that's where it really is not a good deal. Now, backing up to what he was talking about Israel at the first, I mean, we really do have a problem. This is something that goes back to the 60s. If you want to go back and look at articles, people were really complaining in the 60s about how that public schools were starting to teach moral relativism. Everything is okay. There's nothing that's really wrong. All ideas are comparable. You saw it when you were in the legislature, and some of the textbooks you saw with it. No matter what form of government you have, it's a great form of government for those people. All governments are equal. And so this moral relativism is now why we have moral equivalency. And the moral equivalency that we have out of the White House is, Israel is worse than Hamas is because Israel's killed more people than Hamas. No. Hamas has killed more people because they keep using civilians as human shields. When Israel goes in and emails and texts and broadcasts and drops leaflets, and Hamas puts people out there so they can say, look at all the civilians that are being killed, that's murder by Hamas. So there is no moral equivalency no matter what measurement you use, at least if you're using civilized measurements. And that's where you get into moral relativism, moral equivalency. You don't like measurements. Everything's equal. And, oh, my goodness, only several dozen Israelis have died, but hundreds of Hamas have died. So that must mean that Israel is more wicked than Hamas. And that's the problem we've had since the 60s in teaching a moral relativism. So that's a real difficult thing for it to work with. And then, talking about John Kerry on that issue of moral equivalency, I don't know why Louie would think that John Kerry has any moral equivalency given the position that John Kerry holds on marriage, on homosexuality, on abortion, on religious conscience, on religious expressions. I mean, since he opposes everything that's traditionally moral, why would there be a question of whether he's moral? And I'll say that again facetiously. But given a voting record,
it's what you've said so often. You've said, look, if somebody's not going to be willing to protect your life, if they're bad on these clear moral issues, how can we expect them to be good on some of these more complicated issues.
That's right.
I mean, here you've got an issue that's really not that complicated. There shouldn't be a confusion about moral equivalency, but you're exactly right. If he's so wrong on all these other clear moral issues, how could we expect him to figure this one out?
And see, if you're wrong on an issue as simple as innocent life, then you have real trouble with guilty life as well. And when you take an unborn child that is innocent life, and he doesn't think that that's right and wrong to take the life of an innocent unborn child, then when you see something like Hamas, which is guilty people who are murderers being taken out, he thinks that that's abominable. So his whole value system is skewed, and that's the way so much of this administration has been. That's why when you are wrong on the life issue, you will find that you're wrong on economic issues, which we're seeing out of this administration, by the way. Congratulations, America. This week we hit $17 trillion in debt. We're wrong on the economic issues. We're wrong on the employment issues. We're wrong on the foreign affairs issues. If you can't get the simple issue of something that's right and wrong, which establishes there is no moral equivalency. If you believe that abortion's wrong, then you believe there are rights and wrongs. You just can't be a world leader if you don't believe that certain things are right and certain things are wrong, and that's where we are right now. And fortunately, Louie does believe certain things are right and wrong, and that's why he's able to predict what's been happening for the last 3 to 4 years. But we need a president and administration that also believes there are certain things that are right and wrong.
Goes back to what our friend Bob McEwen always says: you can solve all these problems if you have the right leadership in place. So there are good people like Louie. There are good people that do understand these things, that can take the right actions. And when I say solve these problems, I mean deal with these problems. And some of these you aren't going to solve for the long term till the Lord comes back. But at any rate, we just got to get the right leaders in place and people that understand these issues. Thanks for listening today. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand under